My daughter turned around at the front door, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "We aren't freezing our futures for a sinking ship." Then she zipped her designer overnight bag, turned on her heel, and walked out. My two sons followed her down the porch steps without looking back or saying a single word to me. Exactly 20 minutes after the sound of their car engines faded into the Texas night, my phone rang. It was my specialist. What she told me over the line made me sit right down on my cold hardwood floor and burst into a fit of breathless laughter. Not because anything was funny, but because for the first time in 5 days, the fog completely cleared, and I finally saw my children for exactly who they were. My name is Clara Vance. I am 61 years old, and I live in a historic sun-faded craftsman home in Austin, Texas, that my late husband Arthur and I bought 3 decades ago. Arthur was a master carpenter, and I spent my life running a boutique antique art restoration studio. Together, we built a life rooted in patience, understanding that old broken things just needed time, care, and steady hands to be made whole again. Arthur passed away 5 years ago from a sudden stroke. Since then, the big house has felt quiet, but I always comforted myself with the thought that we had raised three strong, independent adults. My eldest is Julian, 35, a high-stakes corporate attorney in Dallas, who measures a person's worth by their net worth. Then there is Chloe, 32, a boutique PR consultant who can wrap absolute cruelty in a warm southern smile. And the youngest is Silas, 28, who works in venture capital and views every human relationship as a balance sheet of assets and liabilities. And then there is my 16-year-old granddaughter, Maisie, Silas's daughter from an early marriage. Maisie is a quiet artist, the only person in the family who calls me just to ask how my garden is doing or to share a sketch she made, never wanting a single dime. 5 days before my children abandoned me, I was sitting in a sterilized white room at Austin Medical Center. My oncologist, Dr. Aris, turned her monitor toward me, pointing at a dark, aggressive shadow invading my scans. She looked at me with heavy, practiced empathy and told me the biopsy confirmed an advanced, aggressive stage-4 malignancy. She tried to soften the blow with talk of experimental trials, but as someone who meticulously restores fragile artifacts, I knew when a structure was considered beyond saving. I drove home with the AC turned off, letting the heavy Texas heat press against my skin just to remind myself I was still alive. That night, I called my children. Within hours, all three of them gave nearly identical, beautifully scripted proclamations of love. "We're dropping everything, Mom. We love you. We'll be there." For 4 days, my house was full for the first time in years. Julian set up his laptop at Arthur's old workbench. Chloe stocked my fridge with expensive organic juices, and Silas constantly checked my thermostat. But true care is messy and inconvenient. What I was watching felt choreographed, like a high-end theater production. By the fourth night, the masks began to slip. I noticed Julian lingering by the vintage oak filing cabinet, where Arthur and I kept our property deeds. Chloe spent an unusual amount of time admiring the rare 19th century oil paintings in the parlor, subtly asking which ones were my personal favorites. Silas, under the guise of financial planning, casually asked if I had updated my trust paperwork since their father passed. I wanted so badly to be wrong about them. I told myself grief just makes people pragmatic. But the truth was waiting for its cue. That night, I cooked a rustic pot roast using the heavy cast iron skillet Arthur had restored for me decades ago. I wanted just one evening that felt like a real family dinner, not a clinical countdown. I set the table with our finest porcelain, the pieces we usually reserve for Thanksgiving. For a few minutes, listening to the three of them chat over each other, I allowed myself the luxury of hope. Then Julian set his wine glass down with a heavy, deliberate click. "Mom," he said, using the exact patronizing tone he uses for hostile corporate takeovers, "we need to talk about the estate and the art studio's inventory before your cognitive energy starts to dip. We need clarity." The warmth evaporated from the room. Chloe elegantly patted her lips with a cloth napkin. We just want to shield you from stress, Mom. If the trust isn't explicitly restructured to avoid probate, everything gets tied up in state courts. Silas didn't look up from his steak. Do you even have a liquid capital breakdown? Because if we have to auction the inventory off in a rush, we'll lose 40% of the valuation to estate taxes. I sat perfectly still, a cold weight settling behind my ribs. I haven't touched our estate plan since your father passed, I said softly. I didn't have the heart to change anything. The shift in the air was instantaneous, stripping away 4 days of practiced affection. Julian's jaw tightened. Are you telling me we flew out here, rescheduled client hearings, and you haven't even centralized your assets? Chloe's smooth, empathetic voice dissolved into sharp irritation. Mom, that is incredibly selfish. Do you have any idea what kind of logistical nightmare you're leaving us to clean up? Silas let out a short, cynical laugh. I postponed a venture funding round for this. Looking at them across the table, the illusion completely shattered. I spent my life examining old canvases, learning to spot the microscopic cracks that prove a painting is a counterfeit. For 4 days, I had been looking at counterfeits. They hadn't rushed to Austin because they were terrified of losing their mother. They had rushed here because they wanted to claim their slice of the gallery before the body was cold. We aren't freezing our futures for a sinking ship, Chloe snapped, pushing her chair back so violently it gouged the old hardwood floor. I have a firm to run, Mom. I can't put my entire life on pause for someone who won't even cooperate. Julian didn't voice a single word of protest. He was already typing on his phone, signaling his driver. Silas refused to look me in the eye. Within 15 minutes, I sat entirely alone at the massive dining table, listening to the muffled thuds of heavy suitcases being dragged down the wooden staircase. They packed with the efficient, cold fury of investors cutting their losses on a bad stock. Julian stopped at the threshold of the front door, his keys jingling in his palm. You should call a trust attorney first thing in the morning, he said, treating me like an underperforming client, before things get messy. Then they left. The heavy front door clicked shut, and the absolute silence of an empty house rushed in to fill the void. Exactly 20 minutes later, the phone in my pocket buzzed. Dr. Eris's name flashed across the screen. Her voice was trembling, completely stripped of the calm clinical distance she had maintained in the exam room. Clara, she breathed, her voice cracking slightly. I need you to sit down if you aren't already. I told her I was sitting. I wasn't, but I slowly lowered myself right there onto the kitchen floor, my back pressed against the lower cabinets, staring at the half-eaten dinner left on the table. There was a massive clerical error in our pathology lab, Dr. Aris said, her voice laced with panic and profound relief. When the tumor board met this afternoon to finalize your treatment plan, we cross-referenced your biopsy with the digital records. Clara, the aggressive stage-4 malignancy results do not belong to you. They belong to another patient with a nearly identical surname whose file was misrouted. The kitchen wall felt solid against my spine, grounding me as the world spun. I don't understand, I whispered. Your actual biopsy came back an hour ago, she continued rapidly. You do have a mass, and it does require surgery and localized treatment, but it is early stage, highly localized, entirely treatable. Your prognosis is excellent, Clara. Genuinely excellent. I am so profoundly sorry for the agonizing stress of the last 5 days. I sat on that cold floor, and a sudden sharp laugh escaped my chest. I laughed until tears stung my eyes. In a mere 20 minutes, my reality had fractured twice. I had just found out that I likely had decades left to live. And in that exact same 20-minute window, I had been granted the terrifyingly rare privilege of finding out exactly who my children were, when they believed I had nothing left to give them. I didn't call them that night. I sat with the beautifully terrifying truth in total stillness, letting the relief and the heavy grief wash over me in equal measure. 2 days later, I noticed that a rare late 18th century silver pocket watch, Arthur's most prized personal possession, was missing from the velvet-lined display box in our parlor. It was the exact spot Chloe had been eyeing so closely. Out of a cold, quiet curiosity, I checked our front porch security camera footage. Sure enough, time-stamped the very morning after they stormed out, Chloe had let herself back in using an old emergency key hidden under a planter, stayed inside for less than 5 minutes, and left with something heavy tucked into her coat pocket. I didn't confront her. I didn't send a furious text. Instead, I quietly had the locks on every door changed that very afternoon, and I placed the video clip into a digital folder titled Clarity. The following Monday, I made an appointment with my estate attorney and oldest friend, Evelyn Sterling. I sat in her sunlit office downtown and laid out every single piece of the puzzle. The initial diagnosis, the brutal dinner, the suitcases, the 20-minute miracle phone call, and the security footage of my own daughter looting my home. Evelyn stopped typing on her laptop, took off her reading glasses, and looked at me with deep, unwavering intensity. "What do you want the future of your life's work to look like, Clara? Not what guilt tells you to do. What do you actually want?" "I want everything I have built to go to the people who showed up for my life," I said, my voice entirely steady. "Not the people who showed up to scavenge what was left of it." "Then let's draft that," she replied simply. The new will was meticulous. The historic craftsman home and my entire antique restoration studio were placed into a protected trust that will transfer completely to my granddaughter Maisie when she turns 25. The rest of my retirement assets were redirected to fund a community preservation grant for young local artisans in Austin. To my 3 children, Julian, Chloe, and Silas, I left a fixed, modest sum of exactly $500 each, just enough to legally ensure they could not contest the will in court, and a quiet receipt of the exact value they placed on my life. My first localized radiation treatment fell on a rainy Tuesday morning. I fully expected to drive myself to the clinic and sit in that vinyl chair alone. But when I opened my front door at 7 a.m., Maisie was sitting on the porch steps, her sketchbook in her lap. She had skipped her high school art seminar just to sit with me for 5 hours, reading old poetry aloud and making sure my water glass was never empty. She didn't do it out of a performative obligation. She didn't do it because an estate attorney was watching. She did it simply because she wanted to be there. Over the next few months, as my treatment succeeded and my health completely returned, the text messages from my children arrived like automated clockwork. Julian sent brief detached messages asking if my paperwork was moving along. Chloe sent a generic wellness basket from an online company with a printed card she hadn't even signed by hand. Silas called once for 3 minutes to ask if my insurance company was covering the hospital bills efficiently. I noted all of it without a single drop of anger. Anger burns hot and blinds you. Clarity is cold, quiet, and rearranges your entire universe. When Chloe eventually discovered the updated trust documents months later during a brief visit, the family dynamic exploded. She called me screaming, accusing me of being vindictive and heartless. I listened to her voice shake with financial fury, waited for her to finish, and then spoke with absolute calmness. "This isn't about spite, Chloe. It's about truth. You showed me exactly who you were in the 20 minutes before that second phone call arrived. I am simply treating you like the strangers you chose to become." What stays with me now isn't the betrayal. It's the profound gratitude for that one clerical error. It took a single mistake in a hospital lab, a 20-minute gap between a lie and the truth, to reveal a lifetime of hidden character. Some people will only love you when they think you are a closing chapter, ready to hand over the inheritance. They will abandon the ship the second they think it's sinking. But what they don't understand is that the people who are meant to survive will build a brand new life using whatever pieces they have left. I walked onto that kitchen floor with a death sentence, and I walked off it with my entire future completely restored. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button right now. Every week on this channel, we bring you real, unforgettable narratives of people who refuse to let betrayal break them. You definitely do not want to miss what is coming up next.